So hi guys, welcome to everyone to this second webinar in our series on the business case for sustainability. Welcome to all the new audience members, and of course welcome back to those who tuned in last week. I just want to hear or confirm that everyone can hear me, so if I can get a few yeses in the chat, then that'd be great. All right, that's perfect. Good. So yeah, so as I said, welcome. This is the second webinar that we're running to get between 2030 Builders and Turnkey Group. Last week, we had a webinar which kind of dived into the why behind sustainability. So going into kind of the overall trends and drivers that are pushing companies to accelerate their sustainability initiatives. And today, we'd like to go into the how. So taking a deeper dive into tools that companies can use to properly measure their sustainability initiatives and to properly communicate this to their stakeholders, both internally and externally. So for those of you not familiar with either of us, 2030 Builders is a sustainability software startup. So we have a digital tools to help involve employees in the sustainability decision-making process. And Turnkey Group is a sustainability software platform helping their clients to understand both operational and supply chain risks via live data analytics. And once again, our speakers today are Mia Negru, founder at 2030 Builders, and Ian Catley, who's partner and director at Turnkey Group. Just a few practicalities before I hand things over to Ian. We will be recording the webinar, so you'll have access to that afterwards, and we'll also be sharing the presentation slides. And obviously, I encourage you to ask us many questions throughout, so that we have time to at the end to present these to the panelists. So really, without further notice, Ian, I'll hand things over to you.
Thanks very much, Frederick. Hope you guys can hear me well. As Frederick says, my name's Ian Catley. I'm a partner at Turnkey Group. So I echo Frederick's thanks for those of you who joined last week's webinar, where, that's right, we discussed why it's so important for sustainability in a modern business. And I guess for those of you that missed it, the webinars are driven by that key message that investing in sustainability isn't just the right thing to do. It's actually good for business, both in the short and the long term. So this week, we're going to focus on the how companies of all sizes can start, or indeed enhance if they've already started, their sustainability journey. And again, I've kept this pretty high level, but I'll really be happy to answer any questions you might have at the end. My apologies to those who heard this last week, but for the benefit of anyone joining for the first time, there's some quick facts about Turnkey here. We're an advanced sustainability platform that facilitates live measurement of both the company and its suppliers' performance. And this really creates transparency and highlights the action needed on environmental, social impacts and risks. So our main focus is on productivity and cost optimization, and also strategic KPIs to maximize performance improvements. And our Sustain Tech modules really enable clients to drive sustainability across their entire business and out into the supply chain. So as mentioned last week, once you understand why sustainability is important for the business, then it's really about how you go around creating and executing a sustainability strategy. And there's four sort of stages to this in high level terms. And the first one is engage, which we really covered last week, the why and how you engage people. Then there's measure and act, which is what we're going to really talk about, or I'm going to talk about today. And then there's communicate, which Mia is going to take that topic on. So these are sort of the most common steps. Sometimes there's 5 or 6, sometimes 7 or 8, but we should like to think there's a sort of 7-stage plan really, where you're going from your materiality review, collecting your data, starting to get reports and analytics, right through to targeting inefficiencies, and then really expanding and growing the program out throughout the business. And these are probably the most common steps that you're going to see on a sustainability journey. And if we start with materiality, I can't stress materiality is really, really important. Before you really get going on this, you need to understand your business quite well. You need to identify and prioritize the locations and the issues or the indicators that matter most to you as the business and also to your stakeholders. And materiality really helps you to act on those issues that have the highest priority. You can take into consideration things that are coming, new frameworks or changes in regulation or legal changes coming your way for your industry. And what we see now is it's also really important because stakeholders are expecting transparency in what's behind your sustainability. So you need to be prepared to explain or justify your choices of why you're measuring certain items. And the benefits of carrying that out, a materiality assessment really are many, but the most important thing is it focuses your efforts to better utilize resources. We know that for a lot of companies, sustainability is not top of their agenda, so you're not going to have resource thrown at this. You need to really focus and keep it really, really clear what you're looking at in terms of the materiality. The second thing is you need it to become part of the core business. It cannot sit there out on its own in isolation. It should be part of a core business, and materiality will help you to do that by embedding those key features into the whole strategy. And then finally, it provides that basis for development of performance measures. How do I know how I'm performing? Year-on-year improvements, target reductions, KPIs, and so forth. It actually gives you the baseline to work from. I guess one highlight here is a recommendation: don't try and start with everything. You don't need to think of everything that's important to the business. You need to think of, if you like, the low-hanging fruit, the things that are really key for you. So start small. Start with 3 or 4 indicators. You can grow that. You can expand it later on, but at least start, get that journey, if you like, moving forward. I showed this last week, the modules that we use within our Sustain Tech product, but I think what you'll find is on the left-hand side is the ones where most of the common indicators are going to come from initially. So energy, your electricity, your gas, your water, operational things like waste and material consumption, raw materials, packaging, things like that. And of course, social, and potentially it may drift into health and safety, though for a lot of companies, that's not so critical necessarily. But this is where you're going to find most of the key indicators are coming from. So if we've looked at our data materiality, then we need to start looking at how do we collect data from the business. And there's a few things, a few characteristics that you really need to think about. First of all, it has to be easy to collect data. You cannot make this a big overhead. I've said already, you're not going to get resource for this. It's got to be simple. So you need simple templates. You need import options. If possible, you need system-driven data. So coming out of your legacy systems, your ERP, or indeed from things like smart meters now. That's increasingly a trend we're seeing. But that data needs to be validated. Authenticity is going to become really critical. If you plan to build a strategy around data and you plan to publish those results, maybe respond to tenders, maybe use it as part of your marketing, it's got to be justifiable and supported by good evidence. Otherwise, you're into greenwash, and that's a really dangerous place to go. Third thing, it needs to be configurable and standardized. So a lot of it needs to be automated. The calculation of your CO2 needs to be automated. You need flexible emission factors, because if you're working just in, for instance, Denmark or in the UK, that's absolutely fine. You've got one set of emission factors that apply to that country. But you're working globally. Trust me, the emission factors for electricity in Denmark compared to Indonesia are a million miles apart. So you need to be able to ratify that and actually normalize that data, if you like. So normalizing the usage of measure, normalizing currency to a standard business currency, things like that are really important. And that's where a platform actually becomes very useful, because you can do some of that in the background. And then finally, you need to consolidate and centralize that data at a management level so that you've got an easy oversight of aggregated view of the data. And that needs to be across multiple departments and location types as well. So it may be you're running a business with 2 or 3 warehouses or half a dozen shops or 1,000 shops, who knows? You need to be able to compare across those different entities and those different location types. And there's that sort of well-known comment from Peter Drucker, the famous sort of management consultant, which is what gets measured gets managed. And we really believe that. I think if you can start to measure stuff, then you can actually start to manage it. Otherwise, it's really anecdotal and very hard to pin your hat against. The trouble is, data is really, really dry. I put this up deliberately just to show you quite how boring it can be. And so we need to look beyond the data. Data is the backbone of what you're doing and is what drives the reporting process. But the key things around data are actually what I just said. It's about how do you upload it quickly and easily? How do you calculate it? What are your data quality assurance features? So you'll see here, there's a pending validation because it's out of sync with all the other amounts. It's way lower than normal. So we put a validation tolerance in there to say if it's 10, 15, 20, whatever percentage you like outside of the norm, go and check it. Maybe put an extra zero in, maybe left a digit out. And again, it's all about centralized data management. So we're looking here at several different locations, several different consumers of the energy. So once you've done the materiality and defined that, then you started to load your data. What becomes really where it gets more interesting is the reporting. What does that look like? Well, if we look at the sort of information that's normally included in sustainability reporting, of course, it's that ESG, that environmental social governance. So your environmental impacts, what is the consumption of non-financial resources, such as energy, such as water materials? What's your impact of waste and pollutants? So waste sent to landfill, water discharge, poor quality water being discarded. That's really critical. And of course, your greenhouse gases. We talk about them all the time, but it is still the biggest driver, I suspect, is climate change and greenhouse gas. And then you've got the social side, which is diversity, inclusion, and inclusion, gender equality at management board level, and training opportunities, things like that. And governance, a little bit harder to measure, but you can still look at things like shareholder rights and remuneration. Are you paying your female or ethnic staff the same as indigenous or male staff? So really important that you have those type of elements built into your reporting. There's other things you can talk about as well. There's the wider risks, and this is less data and more about the report that you produce. So what is the impact of my business on climate change? What's the impact going to be from resource shortages? Or if I decide I want to look at, or there's a demand from customers for new products, what's the impact from that going to be? And that sort of drives into your innovation and future strategy, so that you're producing goods and services going forward that actually match the sustainability agenda that you've set. I've deliberately separated reporting and analytics simply because reporting is what you get out of the system. Analytics is really starting to drive some meaning from that. So when you're reporting, you can say, this is how much I've consumed compared to last year. This is how much water I'm using compared to the year before. All of those things are great, but analytics actually starts to allow you to, if you like, slice and dice that information and set up visualizations around it. And to us, we believe knowledge is power, and it's really true that the value comes from actually analyzing the data on a wide range of insights, and using that to guide the strategy and the decision making that you have. And in turn, that will improve the business resource efficiency. So you start to pull out much more interesting charts, things that actually are meaningful and tell you something. And I'll give you some better examples of this in a couple of moments. But analytics, it needs to be insightful. It needs to be tailored to each user's requirements. If you present figures to the CEO, he's interested in headline risk. He's interested in what the real big risks to the business are. You present the same data to the facilities manager, and he wants to know how much energy he's using in his location. So they're both using the same data set, but they're using it in very different ways. And that's why aggregated data is so important. And that's why detailed analytics is important. So you can drill down to a really granular level, what's happening at that location, or what's happening in the business as an overall entity. And that can incorporate, of course, emission, but also consumption, also cost analysis. And we believe it's important it's all free. You sometimes struggle with cost, and there's good reason for that, but certainly emission and consumption you should better get every time. And then there's intensity, and a lot of people don't necessarily understand or know the term intensity when it refers to sustainability. It's absolutely critical. If you're going to compare across a business, you have to compare with apples. And so this is one area where we see our clients really have experienced significant cost saving by able to quickly identify between different locations based on an intensity level. So if you've got two warehouses or two factories or two retail outlets, and they're very different sizes, then of course they will use different energy levels. But what about comparing that at an employee level, or a per square meter, or by turnover, or if you're a factory, by production unit? Then you're starting to get a real feel for how those locations are performing and how they're performing against each other. And then the third thing that analytics really drives is this benchmarking, this what if scenario. What if I decide that I'm going to change my packaging supplier and move to a more recyclable material? What's my impact on CO2? What's my impact on cost? So I'm going to show you some examples of these now on the intensity and the benchmarking. So if you look at this graph here, the intensity feature is actually normalizing the data. So we're looking at this consumption across multiple offices based on number of staff. And what you see here is this office here, this Singaporean office, is one of the lowest users of energy, and yet per staff member, it's one of the highest. Conversely, this is the highest user of energy, and it's one of the lowest. So immediately you've got a visual thing that's saying to you, I need to look at that. Why is that happening? What can I learn from this location that I can apply to this location? And that's why intensity is so important. And then second, you've got this material consumption. And here we're looking at a breakdown of material that's indicating there's been a switch from plain paper and board to recycled paper and board. And we can start to look at that and say, what was our impact on emissions from taking that action? And you know, I could give you dozens of examples. These are just very high level sort of examples that you can work on. So the last piece I want to talk about, we've gone through this cycle from materiality to data collection to reporting and analytics, is this output versus outcome. And it's really important because output is the reporting, the analytics. It's what you get out of the data that you've collected. It's outcome that really becomes impactful. So your outputs are usually measured on a frequency, annually, quarterly, monthly, whatever it may be. They're very factual. They're reporting for frameworks, for stakeholders. How much carbon have I used? What's my consumption of raw materials and water? What are my social metrics? It's the outcomes where it becomes really exciting. You know, how do I reduce energy usage based on the trend? Just like I showed you there, why is Singapore using so much more energy per meter or per employee than Hong Kong? Lower staff turnover. You know, we've got clients, I can tell you, who identified high staff turnover in a specific age group, and they were able to link that to training. And they changed their training program, and they actually saw a dramatic decline in staff turnover based on that remedial action. So these type of things are the outcomes that you can actually take from it. The benchmarking. Don't just benchmark yourself, benchmark your peers who are in the same industry as you. So it's great to say, I'm doing really well. I've really improved my performance over the last, last year or the last quarter. But am I actually setting the bar high enough, or am I actually setting the bar way too low compared to what my competitors and peers are doing? And then you can incorporate that into the product lifecycle analysis and start to look at what's the impact of my product through the life cycle, from raw material to, you know, going to landfill or going to recycling. And finally, that's that reporting again. I know I said last week it's a bit of a byproduct, but it is still important. You need to report to different frameworks, whether that's the SDGs, GRI, or any other acronym you want to think of. It's all there. And the same to your stakeholders. You need to give them that feedback. And that's what your outcomes are all about. And that's when you can start to look at some really clear examples. So here we've got an SDG report. So I'm assuming everyone's familiar with the SDGs. This is number 13, take urgent action to combat climate change. So we're showing here not only, CO2 by full-time employee, but a mixed on the same report, the actual source of that CO2 emission. We look at this one here. This is SDG 5, achieve gender equality. You know, it's staring us in the face. We've got management representation of women 12%, general staff 70%. That cannot be right. Of course, we've exaggerated it, but you get the understanding. You should be looking at these being pretty 50-50 all the way down, or certainly heading towards that direction year on year. And that should be the goal you're setting. So you start to see that once you've got past the data and got it into the platform, the reporting and the analytics, and then the real outcomes become much more obvious and much more easy to act upon. And I argue, again, they will bring business benefit that is going to be both cost and reputational. So I think I've done my time nearly. I just want to talk very quickly again, just over one more time about the benefits and how the insights help you manage and mitigate risk before they become kind of headline news. So it's knowledge is power. That business value of sustainability comes from collecting and analyzing the data and then optimizing it through the operation. So you start to reduce your consumption of and your emission from things like energy, water, waste, etc. We genuinely believe it gives you that opportunity to win new business, because with advanced analytics, a company has the real data to show prospective partners and customers, maybe through tenders, that its sustainability practices are more than just talk, more than just greenwash. It helps you to understand and mitigate the emerging risks. So your advanced analytics help you identify the risk in areas such as resource use, environmental impact, labor practices. And that shouldn't just be within your own organization. You should start to look and reach out to the supply chain. And finally, it's about compliance and reporting to those frameworks, which we just kind of have to do. It's just part of life. So to close out, I think the real benefits here is less than the data itself, is that you are going to look at employee engagement. So attracting and retaining talent, and that does have a recruitment cost reduction. I think you're going to strengthen your reputation and start to see customers, suppliers, and stakeholders be more interested in working with you as a sustainably focused business, and that will drive revenue growth as you become more competitive. And then you've got the innovation side of things, driving sustainable packaging and raw materials, and I put it in second place, but it's kind of the last one really, is it should see your share value and your investor profile improve. And we know by fact that companies with high ESG ratings do deliver higher investor return. And that's really important, particularly if you're in investor discussions or have investors in the business. So enough of me. I hope that gave you an insight into how we go about the process. I'm going to hand back now to Frederick and let him pass over to Mia.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Ian. Yeah, I can see that Mia has now started sharing her screen. I just want to throw this poll out. I hope, can you see it?
Yep.
So just a quick question before Mia starts. There's quite a kind of a dominance of smaller companies in this. So is there any kind of key takeaway you give to a smaller company where, you know, this whole kind of data collection can seem a bit overwhelming?
Well, in many ways, the smaller the company, the easier it is, because one of the things we're looking at here, this is not an hour by hour, day by day tool. We're not looking at telling people the heating's on in your office, the window's open, or the air conditioning is running and the window's open. So it's not that time. We're looking at the analysis over a period of time, over months, over quarters, and the improvements and the KPIs around that. So it's actually quite easy to collect data. It's not a big overhead. We've got companies with over 1,000 locations collecting data, and I promise you, it really isn't a big overhead. So yeah, I think small companies have as much to gain, if not more, in some ways from this. Perhaps less on the operational upside, but more on the customer acquisition and generating growth and reputational risk as well. So I think it's good for small companies, SME upwards.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, well, thanks for that. Right. Okay, well, Mia, I want to start sharing your screen there. So I'll hand things over to you.
Can you hear me? Can you let me know from the feedback if people can hear me? Also in the chat, if participants, and I want to thank everybody for coming in today, and especially the ones that have been also last week. For the ones that haven't been last week, please feel free to ask for the recording. We have that. I just want to send a warm greeting to everybody from Copenhagen, and to say that I'm very excited about our partnership with Turnkey, because I feel that sustainability is such a comprehensive ecosystem, and that we can only do it by partnering up with other companies that are complementing what we do. And what Jan has said before, that it's very important to measure and to see exactly where we stand for. We come to touch upon the part of communication by saying that once we identify what we've done good, but also where we need to work more, we need to be transparent and communicate that. And 2030 Builders comes to involve employees in both accelerating the sustainability strategy, but also in crowdsourcing solutions, so gathering ideas where employees think they might have useful insights on how to both work with resources, but also on how to maybe change business models into green business models. I have some data here on that only 7% of the employees fully understand the company's business goals, and that's because of a bad internal communication. But also this brings in that 80% of them feel they are not engaged in working, and they lack the growth opportunities, and they don't feel they're contributing. And that's also because they're not involved in everything, on the strategic levels in the company, but also in just implementing, some ideas that they've been contributing with. So that's why in 2030 Builders, we say that sustainability is everybody's responsibility. And we envision that only by involving everybody, we will be able to create impact that we need and the progress that we need for the year 2030 in order to become sustainable at all levels. We are a dedicated team of impact players. Why players? Because we use a lot of gamification in order to engage people to take action, and that's we try to help companies to use collective learning, so where people are learning from each other in order to co-create for green solutions and to empower people to take action. And wanted to talk more about communication, right? Because this is why you guys are here today, to understand how can you communicate better your sustainability efforts, both internally and externally. And in order to understand that, I wanted to touch upon what are today's challenges. And one of the challenges is that the sustainability efforts are communicated only in reports. So a company is submitting the COP, Communication on Progress Report, or CSR report at the end of the year, and they're underlining what are the efforts that they've been doing, how much they've been reducing, their negative impact on water and waste and CO2 emissions or energy. And this is something that comes to both the external stakeholders, to the shareholders, to customers, but also internally to their employees. And I would say that that's actually not enough, because in this kind of communication, 30-page report or 50-page report, we are just touching upon like what actually we managed to do, but not how we managed to do it, and also like what is next. Then employees don't talk about the company's impact. From the sustainability report, the only thing that they can take out and say, oh yeah, actually my company is also working with this goal, or yes, we managed to reduce this. But they are not completely engaged and involved in that in order to talk more, to be, let's say, brand ambassadors, going out there and explaining to others what a big impact the company is doing. And because we talk a lot about sustainability lately, also a lot of the companies are pressured to do greenwashing. And Jan touched very well on that having a full report, is going to help you not to do this. But I also would suggest that the way we communicate about the sustainability work we do is very important, because we see many of the companies today just attaching one of their activities to one of the SDGs and claiming that we work with this specific SDG because we do this and that. And I would say that that is definitely greenwashing. When what the company is reporting on doing, they've been doing before the SDGs came to life, but also not doing it specifically to contribute to the SDGs, but just, hey, we're doing a software, for employee engagement. Thus, we are actually working with SDG number 8, decent work and economic growth. So they are not completely related, and it's many times greenwashing, and that's a trap, which I would suggest that you are very careful, because it's just a way of communicating, and it's also a way of looking into, are we doing an active approach? Do we have an active approach toward this? Or we're just having a supportive approach, like we are supporting other kind of activities in that area by what we do today. When it comes to today's challenges in internal communication, the communication is usually done one way. So companies are communicating through an intranet, a newsletter, or other kind of internal communication tools, where they just send the message towards their employees. Hey, we need to do this, or hey, we decided to become CO2 neutral, but with no kind of involvement. And this means that also employees are not heard. So if in any case they have an idea, they are not asked about how can you contribute to that. They are not asked to find solutions for their own department, or even them as an individual professional. E-learning is, again, not anchored in practice. So we learn some concepts, all companies, they have an e-learning tool, and they do e-learning on different areas. but people are not asked to actually go and say, hey, can you apply now this concept? Now, if you understood what sustainability is, or what CO2 it is, and what CO2 emission and reduction it is, offsetting, can you think about how you could do that? Can you think in practice how we can implement that? And again, as I was saying, sustainability reports are not underlining the individual impact. So when we give the voice to employees to actually come up with an idea and the solution on how them as an individual or their department can support the sustainability strategy and sustainability efforts, then they are very proud of their individual impact. So giving this opportunity in the internal communication and making some internal heroes, out of the people that had ideas, that they are like striving to implement that, I think it's incentivizing other people also to do the same. So our advice from the best practices so far into one way to do better communication is, first of all, this, again, Jan was underlining it before, set ambitious goals. Just say out loud, set for yourself to go somewhere, for your company, to get somewhere. And it can be something on a 2-year strategy, a 3-year strategy, 5 years or 10 years. But then you also need to communicate on the progress towards that. So yes, it's hard to become CO2 neutral in 2 years, but setting up this kind of ambitions in 10 years, for example, it can mean that we strive towards something very ambitious, and that we measure, every year, what is the progress towards there. Secondly, engage all employees. So if we expect that a department of 5 sustainability managers or workers, or like top level management of 10, 15 managers, would be able to drive and like pull the boat, and achieve the sustainability strategy, then I think we don't have realistic expectations. So that's why, if we have everybody involved, if we have everybody understanding where we want to go, and give them the right tools, to push also the ball forward, then that will mean a better impact and also an acceleration of like what where we want to achieve. Then empower people to take action. Again, this is something that is the next step besides learning, right? If you give people a concept, if you try to explain something, to teach them something, then also make them engage into taking small actions. How can you yourself reduce your CO2 footprint, right? Could you choose another way of commuting to work? Or could you maybe couple up with another colleague, and commute together to work? That's just a very small thing that at the end of the day, if everybody's taking a very small action, then it will have a bigger impact. And then be transparent. So being transparent in your communication, both internally and externally, and saying, hey, this is what we are struggling with. This is where we have a challenge. We look into our measurement, we look into our reporting, and we can see that this is where we need to strive more. This is where we need to put more efforts. Then both, the employees of the company will be more incentivized to do that, but also the external stakeholders will be like, hey, at least this company is trying to do something, right? And it's not like flushing out, some lies or like some greenwashing reports, but they are actually trying to get somewhere. And being vulnerable, it also empowers people, to try to do, to put a hand, right? So there are a lot of benefits when we can involve the human capital, both in the strategy and the communication of it. So involving everybody into learning what it is, setting up the goals, looking in the measurement and seeing where we need to push more, but also to communicate, with each other. It's both employee engagement and retention. So people would be more incentivized to stick around, and strive to help in achieving that goal. But it's an innovation seed. So people will think about how they can optimize, the processes, how they can contribute to that, how they can find different ways of doing the things they are doing in order to achieve the sustainability goals, right? Then transparency, again, which is, I think it's a very cool leverage, especially nowadays, when we see with the pandemic and everything, that people are much more connected in a human level, and where we accept failure differently, and where we say that yes, together we can be stronger. And of course, yes, we have some challenges. We have a lot to work, in these areas, but we can do it. And then you will also have the brand ambassadors, right? So the employees that are involved and that are like feeling that they're contributing in a way or another, they will also have the capability to talk with others about this, to be excited when they talk about their company, about the efforts, about the ambitious goals that you're setting up in that. And I know that is a lot of talk, and it seems like it's a very hard thing to do. But we are trying to give a hand, to companies in implementing this and in trying to make their communication both internally and externally easier by engaging the employees. And we do this with a platform, with just an infrastructure where we gamify the process of taking people from not understanding anything about sustainability to connecting the global why of sustainability with the company why of where the company wants to be, and also with the individual action. And that it's just a 3 times business value for both the employee, the company, and of course the external impact that we can have on the environment and also on the society. We're interactive solutions, so everything happens on a screen and on the phones. We also take analytics, but of course, what Turnkey is doing, it's showing you where the problem is, and what you could do with 2030 Builder solution is to take that problem and crowdsource ideas with your employees, and then be sure that they all understand the concepts and that they can communicate back their ideas. We are plug and play, so everything can be customized, and this is needed nowadays when not every company has the same type of challenges, right? So it's very, very important to measure and see where you stand and where is it that you need to do a push to set up the ambition goals, and then try to involve and to accelerate the sustainability towards there. We're claiming that we teach people to speak Sustainish is just because we all understand something different and we all care about something different. And once we start hearing each other, then we are more understanding and we're more empathic into actually helping out in the common effort of getting this achieved. This kind of is from my side. I'm hoping that you guys are going to have a lot of questions and that we can that we can answer them. And thank you very much for your attention today. I'll pass it on to Frederick.
Great, thanks, Mia. I think you actually described the sort of the synergy between 2030 Builders and Turnkey Group very well at the end. So I think that's, if I can say one thing, I think companies that think about collaborating are the ones who are going to be more resilient. So I think that's part of the spirit that we've brought into this joint webinar series. There's actually a lot of really good questions, so I'm just going to get straight into them. I've got one for you, Ian, specifically here. How's your Sustain Tech tool able to report on the SDG sub-goals, not only at like overall goal level? I mean,
yeah, definitely, Frederick. I didn't see that question. Sorry. Yeah, we definitely can. So we currently report to last time I looked, I think 19 frameworks. So GRI, CDP, SDGs. So SDGs are bracketed at the top level, but we go down into the granular level. So within the topic of the SDG, so for instance, gender equality, we will look at things specifically around gender in management or gender pay equality and things like that. So yeah, definitely we go right down to that level. And as I said, we work with all these frameworks because in truth, about 80% of the information is the same. It's the 20% that makes them different. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, great, thanks. This is a question actually for both. It's an audience member from Sweden. So she's asking, in Sweden, sustainability reporting is required by law for large companies, but content is not specified. So she would like to hear the speaker thoughts on like essentials that should be in any report. And I know, Ian, you obviously touched on a lot of these things in your presentation, but if you could answer the question. Or
yeah, I mean, this has been one of the problems. There is a lot of legislation coming out, and it's really coming out of the stock exchanges as well a lot, but it is very, very fluffy, if I'm honest. It's not particularly prescriptive, and I think that's a challenge. That's why we say, look, you've got to answer this stuff. There's going to be some things in there that you have to do. For the rest of it, look at what's right for your business. And that's why materiality is so important. Look at what's key and impactful to your business and actually focus on that first and foremost. There are other things that you might want to do in terms of your positioning as a business, and that may depend on the type of business you're in, but it's quite relevant for you to look at just those things that are important to you, and let the reporting body, the government or the stock exchange is come back and tell you if they want something different. But you should focus on what's important to you first and foremost, I think.
Yeah. Mia, question for you, for both, but I'll let you answer it first. It's an audience member asking here, because sustainability reporting is slowly becoming like a must-have, and like for small companies, there's a newcomer SDG reporting, but she's asking like specifically what additional communication tool do you suggest for better reaching out to stakeholders?
I think stakeholders need to be included in, also in the decisions that we take in our sustainability strategy. So we don't focus a lot on external stakeholders in our tool, but we focus more internally. But I think depending on the level of the stakeholders, it can be different things. So when a company is reporting at the end of the year with either communication of progress or a CSR report, or just sending out a newsletter, to stakeholders, that being maybe suppliers or shareholders, then of course they will include their sustainability efforts. But when it comes to deciding on how to move forward and how to raise the level of sustainability engagement of the company, then including the suppliers as stakeholders, including the customers as stakeholders in taking decisions for future strategy, I think it's very important. And there again, I don't have any specific tool that I can recommend, because there are many of them, but I would just suggest that probably external communication with invitation to talks, or that would be very useful. In our case, in 2030 Builders, we mainly offer the solution for engaging with employees and like whatever internal stakeholders. It can be suppliers, right, where they can go in a game room and go through our experience, and decide on what can be done next, in a specific thing.
Yeah, I take your point, and I think like especially in this time, the fact that we're obviously all kind of working remotely, just any kind of obviously social media platform and trying to keep that connection with any and every stakeholder is key, beyond the report. So thanks for the answer. So for Ian, actually, here's one for you. How does the platform link measurements with compulsory documents that need to be updated, and whose information needs to be communicated?
Yeah, we have a repository where you can store documentation. So if you're, I don't know, running an ISO 14001 program, or you need to keep information for auditors, so we have a central repository for that, which is linked into the actual data that's coming out. So some of the stuff that's coming in will be evidential data. For instance, if you're putting in electricity usage, you might want to upload your bill, so you've got proof around that. Some of it is more documentation around your health and safety policies or first aid policies, whatever it may be. So we have a central repository to do that, and that's how we manage that.
Yeah.
I may just on that last question add one point. One of the things we think is really valid today is to look at certification. There's a number of good certification programs out there. There's big ones like GRI. There's more regional ones in Europe like Planet Mark, and we think those sort of certification programs where you're getting independent verification of your data, where you're agreeing a target and actually only maintaining that certification if you hit that target. So that target may be something, I'm going to reduce my energy usage 5% year on year. If you continue to reduce it, you continue to keep that certification. That's a very good independent way to actually analyze what you're doing, and actually show the world when you communicate that it's not just you saying it. And again, it's that greenwash story. Yeah. But actually someone independent, an auditor or a certification body is actually
Yeah, perfect. Okay, we don't have much time, but I do have one more question. This one's actually for you, Mia, and I guess it kind of feeds into the 2030 Builders solution, and it's I guess it's around how to engage employees in the case of large companies. So companies with like overcoming the challenge of engagement in companies with many locations, even remote areas.
Yes, I think this was a big challenge in terms of last year, but actually what we did in 2030 Builders, also with the Corona pressure right now, so our tool is very easy to be used remotely. So what we do for big companies is that we assist them into communicating their strategy if they have one, and then giving the opportunity to different departments to feed in and build their own internal strategy on how to go forward to achieve those goals. So I would give an example of a company that has, for example, 5,000 or 10,000 employees and also different locations. And they say, we want to get there. And they are like, they have a challenge in communicating to everybody what are their goals, but also there's a challenge in building up a very specific strategy for each department to get there. So what we do with 2030 Builders, we explain the concepts, you know, to all employees, to all departments, and then putting departments in these game rooms where they go together through this experience of building up their own strategy to achieve, you know, the company's goals. Then they will know exactly what to do in the sales department to become more sustainable, in the product development department, in the procurement department, you know, packaging department. So like that, every department can understand, okay, out of these goals that the company wants to work with, this is the one that is more relevant to us, and this is the one where we can actually take action, you know, and do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 actions, right? Feasible ideas.
Perfect. Okay, I think I'm gonna try and squeeze in one last question. I think it's I know it's actually targeted towards you, Mia, but I think there's a part of it, Ian, that you should answer. So the first part, the first question is, what are your suggestions around target setting? Should we be setting targets towards 2030 or 2025? So it's rather that, you know, sort of that dilemma between short-term and long-term ambitions. So maybe, Mia, that's for you. And then Ian, like this one here, is it important to set targets in accordance with science-based targets, or are there other alternative frameworks? So Mia, if I can get you to answer the first part in 30 seconds or so, and then hand it over to Ian for the second question.
Yeah. I guess there's a lot of challenges that we're facing like this, and I think every company has to have their own approach, you know, towards everything that actually works, and that depends a lot on the internal capability. So that's what we are marching on. We look at like harnessing the internal human capital inside companies.
And Ian, your thoughts both on both questions?
Yeah, science-based targets are really relevant, and I think they're very they tend to be very relevant when you're getting more into an industry-specific discussion. But I would caution that you probably need to look at your own business first. It's great to plan these things, but it's like some of the things we talked about, product life cycle analysis, benchmarking, science-based targets. You need to have some data. You need to know what you're talking about and work on a baseline before you can incorporate those. So it does look at scenario analysis in some ways, and it does have a process, but I'm not convinced that's probably right for companies who are setting out on this journey. It's more for very mature companies. Yeah,
I mean, I'd say in general, it's always good to have a 2030 plan or a, 2050, but that's such a long way away, and I think it's much more concrete for customers to know what you're doing in the short term. And obviously, with pandemics like this, things can change in a heartbeat.
Well, yeah, I would actually, our answer to when do we set targets is I would say the next 6 months, because once you start, one of the first things, remember from last week, one of the first things we do is look at historical data. So you don't start on the 1st of June and then wait until you've got 6 months of data in. You start on the 1st of June and you go back 18 months and you start to see the trends immediately. So you should start addressing problems as soon as you can start to run reports, and it should be as instantaneous as that.
Perfect. Well, that kind of wraps things up for today. From my side, thanks to everyone for attending. Thanks to both our speakers, and thanks for all the questions and the engagement. It's very cool to see people attending from all over the world. So kudos to that, and a little call to action. Please engage with us. Please follow us on LinkedIn. go into LinkedIn and search for 2030 Builders and Turnkey Group and start engaging with us. And that's really all from my side. Thanks, Mia, and thanks, Ian, for speaking today.
Pleasure. Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.